They told us every guest left the house alive. So explain why there was still one plate of food on the table when the police arrived. I didn't call 911 because someone screamed. I didn't call because I saw blood. I called because my dining room suddenly felt too full. It was Thanksgiving night, just after 9 p.m., and my entire family had already gone home. The turkey was half wrapped in foil. Empty wine glasses sat in uneven rows along the counter. Football highlights played quietly on the TV to no one. Everything looked normal. But standing alone in that room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't actually alone. It started with the chair. One dining chair was pulled out slightly, like someone had just stood up from it. I assumed one of my cousins forgot to push it back in. That happens. People rush out, kids cry, relatives argue about leftovers. I didn't think much of it. Until I noticed the plate. Everyone had cleared their dishes before leaving. I watched them do it. I stacked plates myself. But there it was, one full serving of turkey and mashed potatoes sitting untouched, already cooling. I stood there staring at it, confused, my brain scrambling for a logical explanation. Then I realized something else. That plate wasn't mine. I hadn't set it. I walked slowly around the table, counting chairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There were 8 chairs. But only 7 of us had come to dinner. I remember saying it out loud, quietly, like if I heard my own voice it would ground me. There were only 7. That's when I felt it. Not fear. Not panic. Pressure. Like the room had thickened. Like the air itself had gained weight. I backed away from the table and bumped into the counter behind me. My heart started racing, but I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. People miscount. Stress does weird things to your memory. Thanksgiving is exhausting. Still, my eyes kept drifting back to that untouched plate. That's when my phone buzzed. It was my sister. She was already halfway home, calling to thank me again for hosting. We made small talk for a moment. I told her I was starting cleanup. She laughed and said she forgot her scarf. Then she paused. "Hey," she said slowly. "Who was that guy sitting near the hallway?" I didn't answer right away. Because I didn't know what she was talking about. "What guy?" I asked. There was silence on the line. "The tall one," she said. "The one who didn't really talk." My stomach dropped. "We didn't have anyone like that," I told her. She didn't respond. I could hear her breathing through the phone. Finally, she whispered, "Then who shook my hand?" That's when the back of my neck went cold. I told myself she was joking. She had to be. Families mess with each other all the time. But her voice wasn't playful. It was tight. Controlled. She asked if everyone else had already left. I said yes. She told me to check the hallway. I don't know why I listened. I don't know what I expected to find. But when I stepped toward the hallway, I noticed something on the hardwood floor near the front door. A muddy footprint. Just one. Pointing inward. The police would later tell me no one had entered my home without being accounted for. They said every family member was alive. They said no neighbors reported anything strange. They said the security camera footage was corrupted for only 6 minutes that evening. 6 minutes they couldn't recover. They told me no crime had occurred. So tell me this. If no one died, why did it feel like someone stayed? My name is Daniel Carter, and before that Thanksgiving, my life was painfully ordinary. I was 32 years old, working as a project coordinator for a small construction company in Dayton, Ohio. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills. My weekdays were predictable: emails, site visits, spreadsheets, and my weekends were usually spent catching up on laundry, watching whatever show I was halfway through, and occasionally meeting friends for coffee. I wasn't reckless. I didn't chase adrenaline. I liked routine. I liked knowing what tomorrow would look like. That year, Thanksgiving landed on a quiet Thursday, and for the first time, I offered to host. My parents were out of state. My sister's apartment was too small for everyone. And honestly, I wanted to feel like a real adult for once, like someone who could handle a house full of family and a full holiday meal without burning anything down. I'd bought my home 2 years earlier. A modest 2-story place in a calm suburban neighborhood where porch lights came on at sunset and kids rode bikes in slow circles around the block. The kind of place where neighbors waved, mailboxes were decorated for holidays, and nothing ever really happened. It felt safe. I took Wednesday off work and spent the entire day getting ready. I vacuumed the living room until clean lines showed in the carpet. I wiped fingerprints off door frames. I rearranged furniture so everyone would fit comfortably around the dining table. The smell of cleaning spray mixed with cinnamon from the pies cooling on the counter. Outside, leaves scraped softly along the sidewalk in the breeze. It was peaceful. Thursday morning started early. I got up just after 7, made coffee, and turned on the news while I prepped the turkey. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, catching dust motes in the air. Everything felt slow and gentle, like the world had collectively decided to take a breath. By late morning, the house smelled incredible. Stuffing warmed in the oven. Gravy simmered on the stove. Football commentary drifted from the living room TV. I remember smiling to myself while setting the table, lining up plates, folding napkins, counting chairs. 7 places. That's all I needed. Family started arriving around noon. My sister came first with her 2 kids. My aunt brought cranberry sauce in a glass dish wrapped in foil. My uncle showed up with beer and a loud laugh that filled the hallway. Coats piled up on the couch. Shoes lined the entryway. The house came alive. People talked over each other in the kitchen. Someone turned the music up. The kids ran laps between rooms until someone told them to calm down. It was chaotic in that familiar, comforting way that only family gatherings ever are. I felt good. Not excited. Not nervous. Just content. We sat down to eat around 3 o'clock. Plates were passed. Glasses clinked. Someone made a bad joke about dry turkey. I remember leaning back in my chair for a moment, looking around the table, thinking how strange it was that this was adulthood now, hosting holidays, talking about mortgages, comparing grocery prices. But it felt right. Safe. After dinner, we lingered. Dessert came out. My nephew spilled juice on the rug. My sister apologized. We laughed. The football game played in the background while everyone slowly slipped into that post-meal calm. By early evening, people started heading out. Leftovers were divided into plastic containers. Hugs were exchanged. Promises to text when they got home safely were made. One by one, cars pulled away from the curb. By 8:30 p.m., the house was quiet again. I stood alone in my kitchen, rinsing dishes, feeling pleasantly tired. My shoulders ached a little from standing all day. My feet were sore. But it was the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from doing something meaningful. I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch, letting the TV play softly while I scrolled through my phone. Outside, the streetlights glowed warm against the cold evening air. Inside, my home felt full of memories and leftover warmth. Nothing felt wrong. I had no reason to think anything had followed my family inside. I stayed on the couch for a while, half watching the game, half scrolling through old photos on my phone. The house was quiet in that familiar late-evening way. The refrigerator hummed softly from the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs, the heating system clicked as it adjusted to the dropping temperature outside. Normal sounds. Comforting sounds. I finished my drink and stood up, stretching my back. The dining room light was still on, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Plates sat stacked beside the sink, waiting for morning. I told myself I'd finish cleaning tomorrow. As I walked toward the hallway to grab a trash bag, I heard something faint behind me. Not a voice. Not footsteps. Just movement. It sounded like fabric brushing against wood. I froze for a second, listening. Nothing followed. I shook it off, assuming the air vent had kicked on or something shifted in the house. Older homes made noises all the time. Mine was no exception. Still, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than usual. I tied up the trash and carried it toward the garage. When I opened the door, cold air rushed in, bringing with it the distant sound of traffic and wind through bare branches. I tossed the bag into the bin and closed the door quickly, grateful to be back in the warmth. That's when I noticed the temperature inside felt different. Not colder. Heavier. Like the air had thickened. I stood there for a moment, trying to pinpoint what was bothering me. The lights were on. The doors were locked. Everything was exactly where it should be. Yet a quiet unease settled into my chest. I walked back toward the living room and felt it again. That strange sensation of being observed. You know that feeling when you're sure someone is standing just out of sight? When your skin prickles for no clear reason? That. I told myself it was just leftover adrenaline from hosting. Social exhaustion. Too much noise followed by too much silence. I picked up my phone and checked the time. 8:57 p.m. I thought about texting my sister to make sure she got home safe. Before I could, my phone buzzed in my hand. Her name lit up the screen. I answered casually, smiling. "Hey, you make it?" "Yeah," she said. Her voice sounded distant, like she was still driving. "Kids passed out already." We talked for a minute about leftovers and forgotten jackets. I paced slowly through the living room while we spoke, absent-mindedly straightening pillows. Then I noticed something small. The hallway light was on. I didn't remember turning it on. I stopped walking. "Did you leave the hallway light on?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. "No," she said. "I thought you did." I shrugged it off, laughing softly. Probably just muscle memory. But I didn't laugh on the inside. Because I clearly remembered turning off lights as people left. I walked toward the hallway, flipping the switch off. The darkness pooled softly at the end of the corridor. As I turned back toward the living room, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Just a shadow shifting against the wall. I spun around. Nothing was there. My heart thumped harder than it should have. I told myself I was tired. That hosting had worn me down. That the house was settling. That shadows move when lights change. Still, I lowered my voice when I spoke. "Everything okay on your end?" I asked my sister. "Yeah," she replied. Then hesitated. "Dan, did you invite anyone else tonight?" The question landed heavier than it should have. "No," I said. "Why?" Another pause. "I don't know," she said slowly. It just felt like there were more people in the room than there actually were. A chill crept up my spine. I ended the call shortly after, telling her I was going to finish cleaning. I didn't mention the hallway light. I didn't mention the shadow. I didn't mention the strange pressure in my chest. I stood alone in my living room, listening to the refrigerator hum, staring down the quiet hallway, trying to convince myself that nothing had changed. But deep down, I already knew. Something in my house was awake. I wish I could tell you the moment it became real was dramatic. A scream. A crash. Something jumping out of the dark. But it wasn't. It was quieter than that. I walked back into the dining room to shut off the light, already thinking about bed, when I saw the chair. One of the dining chairs was pulled out. Not much. Just enough to look like someone had recently stood up. I stopped mid-step. Every chair had been pushed in before I went to the couch. I remembered doing it. It was part of my cleanup routine. Straighten everything. Reset the room. My heartbeat started to creep higher. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I bumped it earlier. Maybe the kids moved it and I didn't notice. Still, I walked closer to the table. That's when I saw the plate. A full serving of turkey and mashed potatoes sat on it, untouched. Steam no longer rose from the food, but it was still warm. The gravy had begun to form a thin skin on top. My mouth went dry. I hadn't left food out. I had stacked every dish beside the sink. Slowly, I looked around the room. The windows were closed. The doors were locked. No signs of forced entry. I leaned over and placed my hand just above the plate. Warm. Not leftover warm. Recently warm. A wave of pressure swept through the room, like the air suddenly gained weight. My ears popped slightly. My chest tightened. That's when I noticed the smell. Not food. Damp earth. The kind of smell you get after heavy rain. I straightened and backed away from the table. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my sister again. Her voice was low this time. "Dan," she said. I just remembered something. My eyes stayed fixed on the dining room chair. "What?" "The guy near the hallway," she whispered. "He wasn't wearing shoes." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I remember his feet. They were dirty. Like he'd walked through mud." My gaze slid to the hardwood floor near the front door. That's when I saw it. A single muddy footprint. Just one. Pointing toward the dining room. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "There's a footprint," I said. Her breathing picked up. "You need to leave," she told me. "Right now." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her she was overreacting. But the hallway suddenly felt darker than it should have. And then I heard it. A slow inhale. Not mine. It came from somewhere behind me. I turned. The air at the end of the hallway looked wrong. Not empty. Distorted. Like heat ripples rising off pavement. A tall shape stood there, barely outlined against the darkness. It didn't move forward. It didn't move at all. It just stood. Watching. I couldn't make out a face. I couldn't see eyes. But I knew it was looking directly at me. The pressure in the room deepened, sinking into my shoulders like invisible hands. My legs felt weak. My instincts finally caught up. This wasn't stress. This wasn't imagination. Something had been sitting at my table. Something had been among my family. And now it was alone with me. I took one step backward. The shape leaned forward. Not walking. Gliding. I dropped my phone. I didn't stop to pick it up. I ran. I sprinted through the living room, my socks sliding on hardwood, my heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to break free. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it was following me. I burst into the kitchen and nearly crashed into the island, catching myself with one hand as I fumbled for my car keys on the counter. They weren't there. Adrenaline surged through my body. My hands shook as I tore through drawers, knocking silverware onto the floor. Every second felt stretched thin, like the house itself was holding its breath. Behind me, something moved. Not footsteps. A dragging sound. Like wet fabric being pulled across wood. Come on," I whispered, ripping open cabinets, my pulse roaring in my ears. I spotted my keys on the dining table. Of course they were. I lunged for them, snatched them up, and turned. The hallway was no longer empty. The tall shape stood halfway between the hallway and the dining room now. Closer. Its outline wavered like smoke trapped inside a human frame. The air around it bent inward, warping the light. I couldn't see its face. But I felt its attention slam into me. My lungs forgot how to breathe. I bolted for the garage. The door resisted for half a second that felt like a lifetime before flying open. Cold air rushed over me as I stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind me and jamming the lock with trembling fingers. I leaned against the door, gasping. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the pressure came back. The garage lights flickered. My car keys slipped in my sweaty grip as I mashed the unlock button. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. That's when I heard it on the other side of the door. Not knocking. Not scratching. Just, breathing. Slow. Measured. Like it had all the time in the world. The door handle twitched. Once. Twice. I jumped back, nearly falling over a stack of boxes. My phone was still inside. I was completely alone. I rushed to the car and yanked the driver's door open, diving inside and slamming it shut. My hands flew to the ignition. The engine sputtered. Didn't start that I felt something heavy settle over the garage, like gravity itself had thickened. My ears rang. My vision tunneled. I tried again. The engine coughed. The overhead garage door creaked. I looked up just in time to see it rising slowly. Too slowly. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the door to the house swing open. The shape stood in the doorway. Its limbs were too long. Its posture was wrong. Darkness clung to it like wet shadows. I slammed my foot on the gas as the engine finally roared to life. The garage door was only halfway up. I didn't care. I hit it. Metal screamed as my car scraped beneath the door, showering sparks behind me. The bumper caught. For one horrifying second, I thought I was stuck. Then the car broke free and shot backward into the driveway. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I tore down my street, blowing past stop signs, my chest burning, tears blurring my vision. I didn't breathe until I saw headlights ahead. Real people. Real traffic. I pulled over 3 blocks away and threw up on the curb. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I called the police from a stranger's porch, barely able to form sentences. By the time they arrived, my house was quiet again. Warm. Empty. They walked through every room. They found no signs of forced entry. No fingerprints. No broken locks. Just one muddy footprint near the front door. And a plate of food sitting on my dining table. Still warm. The police stayed for nearly 2 hours. They checked every room. Opened every closet. Looked under beds. Walked the perimeter of the house with flashlights cutting through the darkness. One officer even climbed into the attic while another checked the crawlspace beneath the kitchen. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No damage to the doors. No broken windows. No footprints except the single muddy mark near the front door, which didn't match any shoes I owned. They told me it was probably stress. That sometimes our minds fill in blanks during moments of panic. One officer suggested maybe someone had wandered into my garage earlier in the evening and left before I noticed. Another quietly hinted that exhaustion and adrenaline can cause hallucinations. I nodded along. It was easier than arguing. They let me back inside just after midnight. The house felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not threatening. Just hollow. Like something had been removed from it. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of Thanksgiving spices and cold air. My phone was charging beside me. I had 32 missed messages from family wondering why I'd disappeared in the middle of dinner. I didn't answer any of them. I couldn't find the words. Eventually, exhaustion won. I woke up just before sunrise. For a few peaceful seconds, I almost convinced myself it had been a nightmare. Then I noticed the chair. One of the dining chairs had been pulled slightly away from the table. I hadn't touched it. The police hadn't moved furniture. My stomach tightened. I walked through the house slowly, checking every room again on my own. Everything looked normal. Clean. Undisturbed. Except for one thing. In the spare bedroom, the room no one ever uses, the carpet near the doorway was faintly damp. Cold to the touch. Like something had been standing there for a long time. I moved out 2 weeks later. Sold the house at a loss. Didn't care. I told people it was for a job opportunity. I didn't tell them that sometimes, late at night, I still wake up feeling that same heavy pressure in my chest. I didn't tell them that every Thanksgiving since, I feel watched while I eat. I didn't tell them that my security cameras in my new apartment occasionally glitch for exactly 1 second, always around the same time of night. The police never followed up. There was no case. No report. No explanation. Just another incident filed under unfounded disturbance. But there's one detail I never told them. That plate of food they found on my dining table. It wasn't something I had cooked. It was a portion from the meal I'd prepared for my guests. Except there was a single bite missing. A deep, uneven indentation in the mashed potatoes. And pressed faintly into the gravy beside it was something that looked disturbingly like fingerprints. Only there were too many of them. And they were far too long. Sometimes I wonder if whatever came into my house that night ever really left. Sometimes I think it just learned where I live now. Because every year, on Thanksgiving, right as midnight passes, my phone lights up with a motion alert from my hallway camera. And when I open the feed, it's always empty. But the audio records breathing. Slow. Patient. Waiting.